Hello everyone, and thank you all for joining us this morning, or afternoon, or evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Today we'll be discussing the cybersecurity controls that are most relevant to startups and scale-ups, and we'll be looking at that through the lens of their growth stage, risk profile, and existing cybersecurity maturity. My name is Natasha Scott, and I head up marketing here at Talanos. I'm joined by Andy Papastefanou, who is the founder and CEO of Talanos Cybersecurity, and also Ben de la Salle, who is the founder and director of ICA Consultancy, both of whom have a wealth of experience of working with early and mid-stage organizations who want to level up their cybersecurity program without losing momentum or stifling growth. I'll give you a brief overview of the points that we're going to be covering today, starting with the situation that many startups and scale-ups find themselves in, which is how to enable growth initiatives, satisfy multiple stakeholders, and ensure that the business is as well protected as it can be against a number of risks, including those posed by cyber attacks. We'll also examine when in the journey it makes sense to consider external help, either through the services of a fractional CISO like Ben, or by introducing a managed security services provider like Talanos, or indeed both. As well as taking you through the 5 critical controls that we recommend, Ben and Andy will also be discussing practices to avoid. So things that could be an unnecessary drain on resources and not necessarily deliver the ROI that you'd be looking for, as well as taking a look at what comes after that. So once you have that robust and scalable foundation in place, what are the next steps? There will be time for questions at the end, and we will get to as many of those as we possibly can. So please do submit them through the Q&A. Any that we don't get to, we will follow up with you after the session. Okay, without any further ado, I'll now hand over to Ben and Andy.
All right, thank you, Natasha. So just a very quick introduction of myself, probably give you a bit of an understanding why I'm here and why I have the experience to be able to talk about this subject. So I've been working around cybersecurity for over 25 years, stopped counting at the 25 mark. I was back in security when it was IT security rather than cyber, when we used to have to go cap in hand to boards to get investment to implement our security controls. I have a technical background. I worked for Sun Microsystems during Y2K and the dot-com boom, but I've also worked in the Big Four advisory, and I've also worked in industry, and I was Group CISO of a FTSE 250 financial services business up until 2017 when I founded ICA Consultancy and started on our journey delivering fractional CISO, fractional DPO and other services. What do? Well, we start with assessing organizations' maturity or readiness against cybersecurity frameworks, privacy regulations, resilience regulations such as DORA and resilience requirements in the UK. We provide capability through our capability as a service offering. As I mentioned, CISO, DPO. We also have security architecture, GRC consultants. We've even done some DPO operations work as well. And then we provide a very discrete set of managed services, one around security culture using a CyberSafe platform, and another one around GRC, so looking at security risk, privacy risk, resilience risk management, third-party risk management, and compliance management. And then we're supported by an extensive network of trusted partners that provide things like technical assurance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I'll introduce myself quickly. I'm Andy Papastefanou, founder and CEO of Talanos Cybersecurity. I'm here chatting with you today because I've got 10 years of building and operating security operations centers, largely for startups and scale-ups. And as a founder myself, I feel like I've got quite a unique perspective on the things that founders are looking for when they're trying to grow their businesses, and we'll chat a little bit about that today. Some of my personal interests are in things like active defense strategies. So this goes beyond just what you can do to protect yourself and how you can go beyond the borders of your own IT environment to actively defend yourself against threats. I'm also an Industry 100 volunteer for the NCSC, and I look after the Incident Insights program, which is largely taking lessons learned from across public and private sector in cybersecurity incidents and turning that into actionable insights and sharing that with the broader community. So I thought I'll just start talking about the cyber dilemma that faces startups and scale-ups, and really to understand that dilemma, you've got to understand the founder's dilemma. There are many stakeholders involved in early stage startups and scale-ups, and they've quite often got differing objectives and points of views on what needs to be achieved in that startup or scale-up. And I've used as an example here just a microbrewer. This guy who's started his brewery. He wants to grow. He wants to be a big company, and really his focus is on revenue generation. Where is he going to find new customers, new markets, potentially building or creating new products so that he can grow the top line? But eventually you get to a point where your ambition outstrips the funds that you have available, so you're going to involve investors, and really what they're most interested in is improving the bottom line. And the way that they're going to do that is by reducing costs and overheads. They want you to operate as efficiently as possible whilst growing. And that really does create a dilemma for the operational team. And the IT guys are part of that operational team. So how do you support more customers in more markets, remain innovative whilst keeping all the overheads as low as possible? IT is just the enabler of business, and the core thing here is to sell more beer and not to buy more cybersecurity products. And if you have a look at the different objectives, ultimately they want to see the startup and scale up to succeed. And in order to do that, it means managing all of the things that could kill it. So with exponential growth comes exponential risk. And if you Google the risks that are facing small business risks, there's no shortage. This is just a summary of all the different things that founders, investors, and operational heads need to worry about. Things like competition. If you're in a regulated environment like financial services, it could be legislative and regulatory changes, data privacy, and remaining compliant in your making sure that you're looking after people's rights there. Reputational risk. The big one is cash flow. Making sure that you can pay your staff month to month as you grow, and hold on to that rocket ship. And right in the top right corner there is cyber attacks. Now, what I thought was interesting about the way that this was worded was, cybersecurity is not the risk, the cyber attack is the risk. And so if we drill into that, what you're trying to do is prepare for, detect, and respond to a particular loss event. So some kind of asset lost, could be your reputation, it could be damage to, if you're in manufacturing like a microbrewer, it could be damage to your equipment. And so really it's about the risk management process that goes into preparing for some kind of cyber attack. Now, how do you do that? Well, I've tried to plot all of the different technologies and processes that people should have in place onto this single graph. And as you can see that there's a lot. There's just so much to do across so many different areas. So what you've got running sort of left to right, there are capabilities. And as you add capabilities, increasing from bottom to top is your cybersecurity maturity. And we've broken it down into 3 sections, and you'll see this in our scale up guide as well. Depending on where you are in your journey, you're going to focus on different sets of controls. So you've got foundational elements, intermediate and advanced elements. And really in foundation, what we're talking about is cyber essentials, just doing the basic things. This could be removing local admin rights from your end users so that they can't install nonsense on their machines. And that includes malware or pirated software, which quite often contains malware. enabling multi-factor authentication across your cloud and endpoint environments, making sure that people are protecting those identities and that you're managing those identities closely. So these are things that you should just do. And really, once you've got those foundational things in place, that's when you can start focusing on the intermediate and advanced controls. And picking those is not necessarily trivial or easy to do. It's going to be largely based on your risk portfolio or your risk profile. If you're a company that develops your own software, you're going to want to focus on protecting your intellectual property. But if you are a branch network and you want to make sure that people in the offices are working, you're going to want to focus on your endpoints. So yes, that journey starts to deviate there. And you would think that by the time most people have got investment into the business, that they've got all the foundational things in place. And this is a very simple, straight line implementation from left to right. You do these things in order and you'll get there. And I'm just wondering, Ben, just to bring you in, from your experience, what do you notice when you get involved with startups and scale-ups in terms of having foundational elements in place? And when is a good time to involve someone like yourself to talk about, what they need to do next?
So I think if we break it down into your beautiful linear timeline that you have there around maturity and the capabilities, that is absolutely not what we see. So I'd love to be in a position to say, actually, when we walk into organizations of startup scale-ups or even enterprises, that we can plot them on that linear journey and say this is where they've got to. And in fact, actually, what we tend to see is many organizations will have controls based on events. Something will have happened. They will then work out that that control is needed to mitigate that event, or they bring the controls in as part of their containment activity. So we often don't see that uniform delivery of maturity as time moves on. And there's many reasons for that, right? So when startups, day one, when startups are formed, they have a purpose, and that's like you're talking about selling beer. That's what they're focused on. And it's often there will be events during a timeline that mean that there are requirements placed upon them, and we'll move on to that in a second. But I think your timeline is a fair one for organisations to implement. So day one, we should be getting the basics in. We should be in a position where actually we're starting to form security practices that will become part of the DNA of the organisation. A couple of examples we've got here are simple things like password manager and multi-factor authentication. If it's there from the beginning, it's just something that's there. Introducing multi-factor authentication further down the line, whether that's internal to your staff or external to your customers, becomes difficult. And actually, we have that in one of our customers at the moment, B2C customer, and they're looking to introduce multi-factor authentication. And the difficulty in doing it is the customer journey, because there is a demographic there that's just not used to doing that for that particular service. If they had done it from the moment they launched that service, they would be in a different place. But as you go through, we get the basics in place. It's all around identity management. It's all around multi-factor authentication. It's all around understanding where your data is. And then we start to implement more critical security controls, when we start looking at how do we protect our IP, how do we protect our customers as we scale. And then the other two kind of milestones we look at are core funding milestones and enterprise customers. Enterprise customers have a different set of requirements and expectations that they will place on you. And that might be that they're looking for certification. You might have all the controls in place, but if you don't have the certification, they're not going to be interested in talking to you. As you start to deliver to more of those types of customers, you will get more of the pain of going through the due diligence and answering those questions. And investors, as you've mentioned before, investors are coming in, they're interested in profit, they're interested in growth, they're not interested in cost. And you get this interesting challenge of they have higher expectations in terms of security, but higher expectations in terms of your cost base, in terms of those kind of operating costs that you have within the business. So you can get that conflict as you start to get that greater investment, greater expectation, and more resistance to spend. If we go on to the next slide. Okay. So when do we seek that external support? actually, early on in a startup is a great time to engage fractional CISOs, and I'm not just saying that because that's what our company provides. I'm saying that because of the flexibility that it offers. You can get access to, in many cases, enterprise-grade security professionals or people that are experienced in regulated spaces, providing you with pragmatic and proportionate guidance on a very flexible basis. I mean, with some of the customers we deal with, we probably speak to them on a quarterly basis just to help them kind of steer their ship and then get involved in the kind of due diligence or investment activities that they might be doing. But you can kind of get that outlay of, what do I need to do today? What do I need to worry about later? How do I have that on my roadmap? And that helps when you're going for funding as well, because you can clearly demonstrate that in line with your growth, in line with your capital, you are going to be improving your security. As you start moving into kind of your Series B and beyond funding, or you start to grow 50 plus employees, over 5 million revenue, the demands will increase and the complexity will increase as well. Some organizations not, because they're very automated, very, very lean businesses, but in most it does start to increase complexity. And the beauty of the fractional engagement side of things is you can just up and you can increase and decrease the amount of support that they give you depending on the demands that you have in any given month. But when you start getting into the enterprise size of things, these are the ones that are going to be expecting to meet your CISOs, to have interactions with them. You can absolutely do that through the fractional side, but at some point you're going to have to start thinking about what capability you have internally. And you are going to need that consistency within your organization. Now, if we think about the 5 critical controls, these are pretty much the ones that kind of work through, as you were saying earlier, Andrew, around Cyber Essentials. There's a reason Cyber Essentials have put that in. I mean, security awareness is an outlier, but the other areas are included within Cyber Essentials. And when we look at the attack paths that we see when we look at M&S, when we look at Co-op, when we look at TalkTalk years ago, all of these things tend to fall into one of 3 camps. It's either around some form of identity and credential compromise that's being replayed, a lack of MFA or secure authentication around that, vulnerabilities within the systems or external systems, and user interaction. So when we think about the controls that all organizations need to have in place, we tend to sit them around those points. So there's a huge debate that goes on within the industry amongst security professionals around, should we be educating our staff around all the possible threats that they could see, or should we be tuning all of our tools to ensure that those threats don't make it to our staff? The fact of the matter is, it's going to happen, right? Whether it's a 0-day, whether it's a cleverly crafted phishing email, whether it's a really simple phishing email, which we often see, at some point it's going to land within your user base. So getting your security culture into a good place is not just about delivering training. I fundamentally disagree with annual-based training, 30 minutes of slides, teaching you to answer 8 out of 10 questions correctly, and then letting you go on for the rest of the year doing your day job. There should be ongoing awareness, whether that's drop-in sessions, whether that's blogs, whether that's behavioural nudges delivered to people just to either in time when we identify poor behaviour, or to praise good behaviour, or whether it's just on a cycle of quarterly awareness, picking up topics and reacting to things that we see in the industry or we see internally, and just giving people a bit of information around it. But the key thing with security awareness is enabling people to know who they speak to when something happens, and that you're running a no-blame culture. Because the more you have an open door policy on these things, the more people are going to come forward when they make mistakes, the sooner you can contain issues within the organisation, whether they're accidental or not. Identity and access management, really simple processes here. Make sure you're on top of your joiner, mover, leaver. So don't give access to people before they've joined the organisation and they've got a contract in place. If they change roles, then their access requirements will change. And when they leave, make sure you disable that access. Reduce the privileges in day-to-day accounts, whether that's, as we were talking about, as you mentioned earlier, Andy, admin accounts, those kind of admin privileges in a standard account, or even just super user access to applications. And ensure that you deploy and enforce MFA across all your accounts. Time and time again, we see that MFA has been enabled, but it has not been enforced. And then it's that one weakness that enables that entry point. So you need to be ensuring that you're enforcing MFA, all accounts, all systems, cloud services, and that you are validating that that's in place. Endpoint protection is an obvious one. Any user access is going to be hitting the endpoint. Emails hit the endpoint. Executable downloads hit the endpoint. It's a very obvious weak part of the infrastructure. These days, Windows devices come with Defender, brilliant product compared to where it was 10 years ago. Mac devices, which I'm a huge fan of, don't come with any endpoint protection, which is a bit of a problem. So, do go out and research. There's plenty of endpoint protection software out there. There's some great Mac management software out there as well that enables you to manage those endpoints. But just make sure that's in place, it's functioning, it's updating, and that you are remediating any issues that may come up with their configuration or their updates. Patching is a huge piece, vulnerability management. When we talk about vulnerability management, that conjures up pictures of quite complex processes, lots of scanning. In reality, if you're just getting your patching in the right place, you're going to be managing those vulnerabilities. Again, time and time again, we see that people are not keeping their operating systems up to date, not updating firmware, not updating applications on those endpoints. And again, they're the weaknesses that can be exploited. And then, of course, incident management is a big one for us because something will go wrong. It's no longer if, it is when. And actually, how well you contain it is how good your incident management process is. How quickly are you notified? How quickly can you have the skills to contain it? How quickly can you eradicate it? And the decisions you make during that process around whether you turn systems off, whether you just cut off access to third parties, are all things that are going to help in the long run ensure that you reduce the impacts of the organization. You need to make sure you identify your internal and external stakeholders. So who needs to be notified and when? Internal is just as important as external, because actually there's going to be business stakeholders that will need to be involved because it's going to be their data or their services that are impacted. And the external stakeholders are important because you could be under some form of regulation, such as UK DPA or GDPR. We have a 72-hour notification window. You could have shorter notification windows for regulators or even your customers. In the contracts that you've signed with them, there could well be clauses that require you to notify them quickly. And the other thing, of course, is around those that are going to support your response. So you might have cyber insurance. That cyber insurance might have instant response within it, whether on a retainer or a pre-agreed rate. And there will be conditions about when you're to notify, how you're to notify, sometimes who can notify. And also, even if it's and I was having this very conversation this morning with a customer of ours, that actually when they have a suspected incident, they are required to let their insurer know. So it's not even when it's confirmed. So you just need to make sure that you understand that. Those 5 controls will greatly reduce your attack surface.
So Ben, I just had a question about the incident management component, because obviously it's quite technical and requires some specialized skills to be able to run properly. And in the startup or scale-up's journey, they're going to have to make a decision on whether they're going to invest in building that for themselves internally or outsourcing that. And I was just wondering if there were any considerations there.
Yeah, I think I have not come across one startup or scale-up that has built it internally. We have done a number of business cases for various scale businesses looking at the in-house, hybrid and outsourced versions. And I think one of the biggest challenges we often see around the in-house capability is attracting the right skills and retaining those right skills and building and providing the tool sets that they need to be able to do their analysis, their investigation, their containment. So more often than not, we end up in a hybrid space where you have people within the organization that understand the services, the architecture, the interactions, and a third party that has those critical capabilities of being able to do the cyber analysis work, the triage, the containment, and the interaction again with things like dark web monitoring, being able to do takedown requests, all those kind of things, which actually we see work really well with an outsourced provider.
Great, thanks, Ben.
Now, when we think about those kind of critical controls, there's also just 4 things that I just think everyone should avoid. Historically, we've always kind of turned around and said, have complex passwords, rotate them every 30 to 90 days, don't allow them to use the last 12. I mean, it's a horrific process, which is it's outdated by many years now, but it's taking a while to make its way through organizations. And I'm kind of hopeful that a lot of the startups look to more of the current advice as they're starting to build this out, but we're still seeing some of that historical advice making its way in. So, the recommendation from the NCSC at the moment is move from passwords to passphrases, use 3 random words. You can add some complexity requirements into that, such as capital and lowercase letters and special characters, and don't force password expiry. The reason being is that with password expiry, it tends to lead to poor behaviours, people writing it down, making notes, doing rotation of passwords, such as just, password 1, password 2. Shouldn't be allowed through your dictionary stuff, but they're the kind of behaviours we start to see. You can either do that or you can use password managers, which actually then allow for ongoing password rotation without user intervention. But again, always make sure that you've got MFA implemented for all of those remote access, and I would say admin access as well. Another area we see is premature certification. So this is where people go, actually, we need ISO. We want ISO. We want the benefit of ISO. Let's go get that. And then what they do is look at the actual cost of implementing that and may take the path of least resistance or the cheapest provider to get there. And there are some different accredited bodies in the UK that can provide you with ISO. We always recommend looking at UCAS. And what ends up happening is they get the certification for the certification's sake rather than the certificate being the outcome of secure practices. And ultimately what that leads them to is having a badge of honour, but weaknesses in their security model. And then when they inevitably have a problem, you have some very difficult conversations with some of your customers. What we tend to suggest is actually from the outset, have a look at your certification journey, build a certification roadmap should you have a requirement to have those certificates. Look at the markets you're going into, look at the frameworks you might be bidding through, work out what certificates they need, and build that out in line with your maturity. Cyber Essentials is a great place to start, even if you're just looking at aligning yourself with it. That's a bottom-up standard, it's a technical standard, whereas ISO and SOC 2 are top-down standards. So they're looking at actually your risk management. SOC 2 goes much more into control effectiveness and looks at that over a period of time rather than a point in time like ISO. But build that roadmap out and think about what you want and start aligning early on. Because again, something like ISO 27001 is something that needs to be implemented across the business in working practices. And that's really hard to do once people have established their processes. If you do it early on and start to introduce it, then getting the certificate will be an outcome and an easy outcome later down the line. Security tool sprawl tends to be something we see in older organizations, so could be scale-ups or moving into larger businesses. And that's generally where they've gone, and going back to what I mentioned earlier, we've had an event, so we need this tool. We've had another event, so we need that tool. Or actually, and I've seen this within portcos, within private equity firms, the PE firm has recommended this tool, so we're going to have it. Or as I experienced in industry, someone had a conversation with a supplier on a golf course, and now the answer to my problem is this product, right? And then I end up with quite a few of those products because everyone loves going on golf days. And what you end up with is multiple screens, multiple policy enforcement points. You're needing multiple skills. And actually, when you start to look at tool consolidation in those situations, you're losing marginal capability and increasing efficiencies. So actually, you need to start looking at that early on. And it's all very well going, I want the best in breed. Actually, Andy, it was called something else the other day when we spoke about it.
Best of suite. Yeah, that's the new one that's making its way around LinkedIn.
It's all very well looking at that. But ultimately, you will often meet the majority of your requirements with some of those broader tools. And actually, you can be more effective and more efficient in managing them and deploying all of the capability. And the last point that I would bring up is box ticking. And it goes back to things like getting ISO 27001. Don't do something because you've got a requirement on a sheet that you need to tick to say, I do it. So don't run annual training because you need annual training for compliance reasons, because that's not giving you the outcome of a improved security culture. Go back and look at what you want to achieve with what you're doing with security and look at how you get there through a journey, be that slowly introducing things. I can assure you, and because security culture is one of my focus points, that running annual training does not turn the dial on human risk management, does not turn the dial on human behaviour. That is not what changes people. However, every due diligence questionnaire you will get from your customers will ask you, do you do annual security training? And you can tick that box and say, yes, I do. But it actually doesn't do anything other than enable you to tick that box. So go back to your objectives, go back to your outcomes, and look at everything you're doing in security and how it meets those. If you do that, you will drive good ROI on your security investment. If you don't, you will never be able to track it. So once we've kind of done those 5 and avoided those other areas, what do we follow? Well, look, this is a very short presentation that we're kind of want to push as much information into as possible. So I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that these are the only 4 things that you will do. But once you've actually got those 5 controls in place, and it's something we do when we do our maturity assessments with our customers and we're looking at their maturity scores, what we tend to do, their target scores, we focus on various things. And it tends to be how they identify risks and therefore the controls they need to mitigate them, how they detect when those controls fail, and how they respond to those failures. Those are the highest maturity targets we tend to give out. We're not giving, higher maturity targets to the protect controls. We're not saying your maturity around IPS, DLP, and all of those things need to be higher than your ability to identify risk. And the reason being is you will actually set your target of how mature and effective your controls need to be based on the risk you identify, which is the practice you should be following in security. So once we've got those controls in place, what we suggest to people is practice your incident management response. Do that through tabletop exercises. Do that through simulations. We're running some exercises at the moment with some of our customers to do SOC effectiveness testing. They've got a SOC. We're actually running covert tests, bit of red teaming to see how effectively and how quickly the SOC identifies that kill chain. And we run tabletop exercises that are not technical. This is with the crisis management team. So how will they respond? How quickly will they make decisions? What will their communication look like? We have spoken to organisations around business continuity. I mean, the one thing I can say about COVID, and there's many bad things to say about it, is because it forced hybrid working, a lot of business continuity plans became a lot easier, but they can't be ignored. So you need to go through and understand how your business will operate should there be a continuity event. Look at supply chain risk. All organisations have critical suppliers. I'm not sure I know if anyone has no critical suppliers, all the customers we deal with. Think about your third-party risk management. Again, think of your maturity journey. How do you identify who your critical suppliers are? Do that through an inherent risk questionnaire. Focus on your critical suppliers. Do due diligence when you onboard them. Do in-life due diligence as well. As you get that working, then you can move out to the next tier down of your suppliers. And you will get to a point where some suppliers, you just record the fact you work with them. Others, you will be doing annual due diligence, which could include penetration testing, which could include site visits. And as I mentioned before, one of the areas we say to our customers is all around, if you think about NIST, the identify section or function, the identify function. So look at risk analysis, incorporate security planning into new business, right? So look at security risks associated with new markets, new products, new services, certainly the way you use personal data. Build out key risk indicators and other metrics that you can use to look at how effectively you are managing that risk and how effective your controls are against that risk. It's important to do this because the actual risk for your business may change over time. It may increase or decrease. Likewise, then, your control and the effectiveness of the control and the breadth and scope of it needs to change and reflect to that. And if you do it properly, you might find areas where actually you can reduce your investment in a particular control because that risk is reducing for you. And then going back to Andy's beautiful linear line, which I would love everyone to kind of start thinking about and following. Think about some of those advanced controls. Think about threat hunting. Think about dark web monitoring. Think about human risk management in terms of, instead of just training and awareness, and how you can do just-in-time education to your staff. But have a roadmap. And I think it's always important that when you think about whether you're a startup or a scale-up, that you have that roadmap in mind of what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and what the pivot points are of when you're going to start improving your security controls. That could be investment, that could be market share, that could be target customers, but have that view and always have a granular view of 12 to 18 months, and then always have a higher level view of the months that follow that. We often recommend a 36-month kind of moving window on your strategy. Strategies are not one and done. You don't create one, deliver it for 3 years, and then create another one. That's just not how the world works. So always be doing updates annually to your strategy to see what's changed or following a particular event.
Ben, I just want to bring you back to the supply chain risk management portion. You know, if a startup has outsourced some of their core processes to a third party, so some of those making sure that those basic controls are being implemented, multi-factor authentication, endpoint protection, patch management, just clarify for me the difference between managing a third party that is responsible for your core business processes separate from supply chain risk management, because they're not the same thing, right?
Are they not? Right. So if I'm internal to an organization, whether I'm looking at IT outsourcer who's looking after my IT, whether I'm looking at outsourced HR, whether I'm looking at Microsoft, right, I would deem those all as critical suppliers. Like the scope of my due diligence and my expectations on them would be different, right? So for a start, Microsoft are not going to answer my due diligence questionnaire. We have tried. They will just be a case of we provide a trust center. You need to pull the information you want from that. However, your IT outsource provider should be regularly being audited. They should be having service reviews with them where they're providing key metrics to you that you can move back against your risk. Just on IT outsourcing, time and time again, what we see is smaller organizations getting IT outsourced and then buying security services from that IT outsourcer. Now, that may seem appropriate at an early stage where I don't want multiple suppliers, I just want one supplier. But what you end up getting is an organization that's marking their own homework. So you've got an organization telling you that they're patching, telling you that they've implemented MFA, and their security team are telling you that that's the case. Now, don't get me wrong, you can land on some really good providers where actually that assurance works really well. But how do you validate that's happening? And we've seen it time and time again. And in fact, we actually responded to an incident with they were a prospect that became a client very quickly because they had a problem where their IT outsourcer had been telling them that they had implemented MFA across the organization. So there is no way the access was gained via a user account and credential breach. It goes back to the point I made earlier. They had enabled it, they hadn't enforced it. Yeah. So actually, when we looked into it, over 50% of the organization was not using MFA. Yet every report they got on a quarter showed MFA as green. So I think you just again, it goes back to risk. How much risk are you willing to carry? And at what point on your roadmap do you change the controls you have around managing that risk?
Last question from me before we get some questions from the audience. I'll hand over to you, Natasha. Just thinking back on the controls, the work that needs to be done, there seems to be quite a lot. It's going to take significant time and money, resources, again, which the founder might have very little of to implement these things. He's got to get the board on side. How do you suggest they go about doing that to try and motivate for something that looks to be a lot of work?
Yeah, so if you go to any of the security conferences or you've been to them over the last kind of 5 to 10 years, and the answer is talk the language of the board. And I think that's probably the least useful response that you can kind of give someone. But if you dig into that and think about what that means is whether it's an investor, whether you've established a board, whether you've got non-exec directors, most of them will understand risk. So if you're in a position where there is a governance framework in front of you within your organization, either you're a scale-up or you're that startup that's suddenly been invested in, and you've got an investor board that you need to go to say, I want to spend some of the money you've invested in us, then you need to go and you need to express it in terms of risk. And that risk isn't just about negative impacts, it can be about opportunity as well. So when we talk about risk, most people immediately go risk of cyber attack, as you mentioned, risk of regulatory fines, risk of operational loss. Actually, a risk can be an opportunity. The risk is something that hasn't happened that will have an impact. It could be negative, could be positive, right? But there is a risk that you need to take. So you need to go to them and you need to express, in terms of business impacts, business outcomes, what investment in security will achieve. And there are various ways you can do that. So, Andy, you and I have spoken about it before. One of the things I did in industry, and one of the things that I recommend to our the security teams within some of the customers that we work with, or our virtual CISOs, fractional CISOs do within organizations, is when something happens like M&S, then what you do is you send out an internal notification saying, look, this is in the press, this is what's happened, this is what would happen with us if that attack, would it be successful, would it not, what controls do we have in place to mitigate it, what's our gap, and what are we doing about that? So it could be, actually, we've got an in-flight project to implement some ransomware controls. It could be that that's actually on year 2 of our strategy, and we're now going to review whether that's going to come into year 1, and we might come and ask for some more money. Or it might be, we haven't got a strategy, we haven't got a plan, this is a new risk to us, and we need to go away and analyse it. But what happens is you get into that open communication flow with those decision makers, is they're not coming to you and going, what can we do about this? You're already telling them this is where we are. And actually, it informs the conversations you then have when you come forward and say, look, these are the risks in the organisation. This is what I need to do about it. You need to be pragmatic and proportionate. No one needs a Rolls Royce to drive to the shops. A push bike will get you there. An electric scooter will get you there. A Ford Fiesta, a Porsche, whatever the view you want to go in. You can build it up over time, right? One will get you there quicker than the other. So actually, just think about that growth as well, and say, going back to risk, this is my biggest risk and has the most potential for impact in my organization, then this is the one where I'm going to want the most of my investment to go. But that doesn't mean I don't have any other risks. So I've got to spend a small amount across these other ones to start turning the dial and moving them towards bottom left.
Thanks, Ben. That's very useful. I'm just going to open it up and give it to you, Natasha. Hopefully there's been some questions coming through.
Not yet. We have had a couple of comments, but if people do have questions, then yeah, please do either pop them into the chat or the Q&A. We did actually have a couple of questions prior to the session today, though, so I will start off with those. The first one, Andy, Ben, I'm not sure which one of, I think either of you could probably take this question, but there was a question around whether scale-ups, smaller businesses are really a target for cyber threats, or is that something that perhaps you only need to worry about significantly as you grow larger?
I'll let you take that, Ben. You put it quite nicely the other day about the opportunity rather than the scale.
Yeah, so I think there used to be a time when organisations would go, I've got nothing of value. I've got nothing that malicious individuals would want. We don't have any particular IP. We're a financial services business with transaction going through. So there used to be this perception that that's what they generally went after. And to be fair, there was a period of time when that's how these threat actors kind of focused their attacks. But actually, what tends to have changed now is it's mainly opportunistic. If we look at, and we've had far too much experience with Lockbit for my liking. If we look at Lockbit as an example, the majority of what their affiliates do is opportunistic. It is, they have sweeps going on, they have vulnerability databases which say these IPs have these vulnerabilities on it. They get clicks from users on phishing emails that they then get alerted to, which they can then go and see what compromise, what lateral movement they can get. And they often don't know who the target is until they get further through the attack, collect some data, start to work out who it is and what they might have. But in reality, all organizations have the one thing in common. They will have some data, be that personal data, because employees, if they're B2C, then large reams of customer data. And they have a service they're providing which generates their revenue. And they're the things, so they can steal the data and they can disrupt the service. And then that creates the opportunity for ransom. And that's what they're looking to do. Um, and and so, there's a phrase that's going around, has been going around for the last few years, that data is the new oil. It's exactly the way that the threat actors look at it. They're trying to gather as much data as possible because they can either hold you to ransom and or they can sell it on to other criminals or use it themselves for onward fraud.
Yeah, I mean they don't hack in anymore. They just log in.
Well, it is. They almost it's a bit like they get a new notification pop up that says you can access this.
Yeah.
And that's how it works. Now, don't get me wrong, you do get people like Scattered Spider who run campaigns and they target industries, but most of the affiliates that are kind of working with people like Lotbit have got some sprawling bots or phishing campaigns that are going out and they're just waiting for clicks.
Okay. Thanks, Ben. And that actually leads quite neatly into the next question, which is more for you, Andy, given the experience that Talanos has, that we see with many of our clients. What are the most common threats to startups and scale-ups? Is it ransomware we should be most worried about? Is it phishing, or is it something else?
I think in the SOC, if you had to have a look at all the statistics of the alerts that come through in our monthly service reviews, the one that always tops the charts is phishing. So it's very low cost. You can spread it quite broadly, so huge volumes of stuff gets through, and it's a numbers game really. And if someone is unfortunate enough to follow through, clicking on one of those links, perhaps they're presented with a fake Microsoft 365 login page. And actually, what's even more prevalent these days is the real Microsoft 365 login page presented through a proxy. So basically, the attacker puts something that sits in the middle. Microsoft talks to its machine, and the attacker's machine talks to the end user. And what it's essentially presenting is the real Microsoft login page. So when someone's capturing their credentials to log in, they're typing them into the attacker's box, and the attacker's box is passing it on to Microsoft and is actually logging in. And what Microsoft does off the back of that is it asks for multi-factor authentication. You'll answer that positively. But instead of getting the token that basically lets you use the Microsoft services from there on without having to present MFA, the attacker gets that rather than your browser. So they're able to keep on transacting as though they were you. It's sort of an attacker in the middle case, and that is always initiated through phishing. So dodgy link comes through on an email. They try and trick the person into downloading an invoice, or it's always around pay increase time. The new increases, the new increase schedule is posted up, and people need to download something to see what their increase is. Trying to motivate them to click these links to take them on their particular journey with the intention of stealing credentials so that they can simply log in, as Ben mentioned in answer to the previous question.
And I think just to add to that, what we've seen as well is that then leads on to business email compromise, where they may look to internally do payment fraud through invoice fraud. Yeah. We ourselves have worked with a couple of small businesses that directly after a funding round was subject to business email compromise and lost a significant proportion of that money. And there again, that goes back to thinking about some of the processes you have inside your organization. So we kind of spoke about the security controls around direct security threats. But when we think about security within business processes, the CEO shouldn't be able to email someone in the organization and go, pay this invoice for me. There should be a process that goes through that says, right, okay, well, that's a new supplier. So I'm going to have to onboard that supplier. I'm going to have to do due diligence. I'm going to have to call them and speak to them to confirm bank details. If it's a change of bank details, I need to phone their supplier and ask them about that change. These simple processes will help reduce those kind of frauds. And again, we see that time and time again.
There's a name for that process. It's segregation of duties.
Well, yeah, there's just four eyes processes and all kinds of things, but it's a case of just making sure that you are validating the details you're being given. And they're very clever. So they will sit, watch, look at tone, and create emails. They create email rules to forward any replies into a separate mailbox, mark them as read. So they try and hide their tracks. Again, you can get to a position where you can turn on those kind of alerts within Microsoft 365. So if someone creates those rules, you can get alerted to it. But when it happens within the inbox of a user, it's much more difficult.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Andy. We don't have any more questions, so I'll kind of briefly summarize and bring things to a close. I think one of the key takeaways that we've heard today is that security is absolutely not a... Oh, someone's just said check the Q&A tab. And I have. We do have another question from Stuart. For a company starting to implement rigorous security measures, how can a company come off with the approach of benefit far outweighs cost, especially to people who aren't completely aware of the need to it? So what are some of the baby steps to take? Would it be that we need to start small to get the ball rolling and then expand as we gain traction, rather than throwing everyone into the deep end?
Okay, so yeah, and I think that goes back to the point I made earlier, Stuart, around when you look at those risks and what you want to do. If you use the analogy of going to the shops, a bike will get you there and a Porsche will get you there, but which one are you going to invest your money in? It's the same with security controls. So there are ways that you can start to build out approaches to managing those risks that may not be where you ultimately will get to in 2 years' time. So get that roadmap, kind of get the baseline controls, and sometimes getting a baseline control in place isn't that you implement that control entirely, it's that actually you implement some control against that risk. So if we think about, I'm going to use training and awareness because it's one I talk about a lot. You might start with getting a base level of understanding across the organization of the key risks. So how do you spot phishing? How do I report a security incident? And then you might say, right, well, each quarter I'm going to deliver a bit more training. And then in year 2, I'm going to run phishing simulations. In year 3, I'm going to implement automation around responding to human behavior. In year 4, we're going to do cyber escape rooms and in-person events. In year 5, we're going to do a complete offsite, and everyone's going to go through some security exercise and I know, SAS training. But it's that building it up and doing more over the years. Some controls you're going to have to accelerate really quickly. It's just going to be, you're just going to need them based on your risk. Others, as you say, you take those baby steps and you build that plan. That's what your strategic roadmap's for. And again, when you go back, you can get some external support at relatively fast pace and low cost to help build that plan out. And then you can, as I say, use it as a rolling window and keep looking at your risks, looking at your events, and shifting things around to meet your risk profile.
Ben, are there going to be any exceptions to that based on your industry? So if you are a highly regulated industry and you have nothing, what's the exception there, and is the approach slightly changed?
Well, of course, if you look at the financial services space, you look at UK Ops Resilience, you look at DORA if you're delivering services. If you fall into those, they have requirements that you have to meet, right? And my favourite part of financial services, I have to say, is Singapore, because the Monetary Authority of Singapore tell you what you have to do.
Yeah.
They don't just tell you the theory. They go, this is the technical standard that I want from you. So there will be places where you'll sit there and say, actually, and it could also be depending on the market you're going into. So if you are wanting to bid within the public sector and go through CCS and certain frameworks, they will tell you what you have to have, and that will force you to implement those controls. There is still an element of bronze, silver, gold approach to those controls. So you can still do some flex. But I think if we can, if you can start with those kind of critical controls and getting people to understand why they're important, do a bit of that education awareness, as I mentioned, let people know when an event happens in the industry, what impact it would have on you, you can just start to get people on your side and understanding more about why that roadmap has to increase. Stuart, I don't know if that's answered your question. If it doesn't, then feel free to follow up with one.
Perfect, thank you. Excellent, thanks, Stuart. Okay, so we only have a couple of minutes left, and I believe I'm now correct in saying no more questions this time. So I'll just very quickly wrap up. I think one of the key takeaways is, security is not a linear journey. It will look different for every organization. But the critical controls that we've discussed today will protect the vast majority of businesses against the vast majority of cyber risks. And then, of course, as you grow and start to scale, it becomes a case of selecting the right controls according to the assets that you're trying to protect, the most pertinent risks that you faced, the resources that you have, perhaps the industry that you're in, or the industries that you want to sell into. And decisions will inevitably need to be made along the way, such as whether to build those capabilities in-house or to outsource. And again, it will be different for everyone trying to weigh up the pros and cons and the costs and the benefits. We hope we've given you lots of useful information and guidance today that you can use to help with those decisions, but we will also share further resources after this session, including the recording and a playbook that we recently published on minimalist cybersecurity. That's been specifically created for startups and scale-up businesses, and really just looks at how to achieve the right balance, how to kind of ensure maximum impact and maximum ROI out of the investments that you make. So lots of good stuff in there, including alignment to the frameworks like NIST and ISO, Cyber Essentials, again, that we've talked about today. You can also schedule a short call with one of our team. If you have more questions, there'll be a link in the follow-up email. And of course, you can get in touch with us via the website. But for now, I'd like to say a big thank you to Andy and to Ben and to everyone that took the time to join us today. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. We hope to speak to you soon.
Thanks, Natasha. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Andy, Natasha, and all.
You.
Cheers.
Thank you.